Hey guys, I'm Brent.
I'm Lila, and you can find us on the web at www.braintrustlive.com. And this week we have another special guest and another returning guest. Erica Bardin is with us in the Zoom chat room. I was going to say the studio. We both have never had a studio and currently don't. And also, you can't be in the same room with people. So, welcome, Erica.
Thank you for having me. And I mean, couldn't we play off of the idea of a studio apartment? And
Fair
just
enough.
drop apartment, and then people can, interpret as they will.
Fair enough.
Yes.
If that ever becomes relevant again, nobody knows. We may never have a recording studio, or studio apartment studio. We may never see anyone face to face in the future.
There will be no collective buildings whatsoever.
Correct.
Only in
Okay,
Lila's
gotcha.
Sims.
Oh yeah, only in my Sims, which is entirely me building houses, but I never put people in them because I don't care about the people in the Sims. I only care about decorating houses. In any case, we had a late minute change in our rundown lineup this week because we decided at the last minute, then more than telling you about Joe Biden's various misdeeds in the world of the internet and media, we really wanted to tell you about some post-Heroes Act action that's going on the congressional side.
Yeah.
So we had promised ourselves when the world ended that we would really focus in on the electoral stuff because everyone's reading the news about coronavirus every day.
Right.
But this is actually, I think, maybe a story a lot of people aren't following and is, I would contend, one of the most important political happenings of the week/recent weeks. And so we're going to start with that, which is about a follow-up bill to the HEROES Act / a proposal that was nixed in the HEROES Act that Pramila Jayapal is sponsoring.
Yes.
And the many bizarre twists and turns that this piece of legislation has taken.
Yeah, some weird stuff has gone on this week. Some strange bedfellows have hopped into this bill together, and we felt like we wanted to talk about that first, especially considering the amount of worked up we were over the HEROES Act last week. It seemed like we wouldn't be doing you and ourselves justice if we buried this later in the podcast.
The only sanctioned bedfellows right now.
Exactly.
The only bedfellows that you're allowed to have.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Exactly.
So one of the things that we were complaining about last week in that HEROES Act that got left out was a version of the Paycheck Guarantee Act, which had been a priority of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. It's been a priority of all progressives since basically the beginning of trying to figure out what we were going to do as a stimulus. It's something that Bernie Sanders has been pushing for a really long time. Jayapal had been working on it for a long time, and then it ultimately just got nixed last week. So now it is has reemerged, and it's reemerged with some of the members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and some mainline moderate Dems who are worried about their reelection.
Well, we saw this coalition start to form in the no votes on the rules the rules vote that would have allowed the HEROES Act vote to go forward. So remember, we mentioned that there were about 8 progressives that voted against the first HEROES Act, in the first HEROES Act vote that voted against it. And then like 5 frontline moderate Dems who were all people that are representing pretty Trumpy districts who had flipped seats for the most part in the last few years. And who, like the Congressional Progressive Caucus, were finding themselves being asked in legislation like the HEROES Act to vote in ways that were going to sort of heavily compromise their electoral chances. And so they have, like the Congressional Progressive Caucus, been looking for some alternative legislation. And the two of those groups, I think, seeing that they both shared this priority during the last week HEROES Act vote-a-thon, decided that maybe they could together try to make sure that companies can keep paying their employees so that people don't lose their jobs and just become unemployed and then rely on the unemployment system, which is what their concern has been, that in a lot of these frontline districts, Republicans are trying to tar Democrats with the reputation of being the party of unemployment, because the HEROES Act and past legislation have all expanded unemployment benefits, but they've done nothing to protect businesses that are in danger of firing people or in danger of having to
Right.
furlough
I think
people.
maybe we should actually sort of like talk about what this bill is, which is going out of order a little bit from our notes on the podcast anyway. But, there have
Not allowed.
I know, sorry. But, this bill basically, as Lila said, allows people to stay on payrolls and companies to continue paying their employees, and also offers some assistance to employers to rehire the people that they have already laid off, and to help them with some other business expenses, such as like rent, paying their utilities, things like that. And that is what a lot of other countries have chosen to do. That's what the UK is doing right now. And basically what it allows you to do, in the UK, they're paying 80% of all employees' previous salaries. And they started this pretty early, so they haven't seen massive layoffs. So they're essentially keeping businesses and their employees connected through this. So you're not later forced with, 40, 50 million people being on unemployment. And that is good, because then it allows everything to sort of like, all of those economic connections are still there when you sort of like, quote unquote, reopen the economy. Because in America right now, what you're looking at is a lot of these companies are not going to be able to come back. So all of these people have been laid off, and then there's not going to be jobs to come back to, because these businesses, specifically a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, are going to have shuttered, or even when they do come back, the demand is not going to be there. They're not going to have the capital to continue to stay open and pay their employees. So this would basically sort of like just put a full pause in the economy, as opposed to letting the economy go to full shit like we've done.
Well, and also there's a delay in this economic deficit, to your point about down the line there not being a demand. Because even if businesses have this cushion, or if the small amount of money that the federal government has given them is helping them out, it's not going to last. They're not going to feel the effects really of it until those benefits go away and we start to reopen, and then they realize, oh shit, even though we can have a client or customer base, like we can't afford to stay open.
Right.
Plus, it means
100%.
that there becomes this waiting period between when there is actual need for economic activity and when we can actually begin to have economic activity, because companies will have to rehire. Whereas if they retain their employees, then when demand returns, they can just start back up without having to go through a hiring process and without having people having to switch back over from another system.
It's basically just sort of like, when they decide that the economy is reopened, it's basically as they left it.
Yeah. And this is what they did in 2008 in some European countries too. I think Germany had similar policies in 2008 and avoided a lot of the layoffs that we saw here for that recession as well. So this is something that has worked in a lot of other countries in the past. And specifically when you're talking about countries that have like a lot of money, that have the ability to put forth a policy like this, it has staved off kind of like spiraling unemployment in other recession eras. So it's something that we know works.
Yeah.
Maybe, as you all talked about in your last episode, maybe those big banks that we all paid for, and the small businesses in effect paid for, could pay back
maybe
all that financial assistance that they got to help all the floundering smaller businesses that are going to be totally toast right now. But my gut feeling is that's not going to happen.
Right. Not without force.
No, but I mean, something really interesting is happening here politically, because in watching moderate frontliners and progressives join together, so the Democratic Party's strategy has been to sort of, kind of bludgeon progressives into supporting moderate policy to protect these frontliners. But at the moment, they're not effectively protecting the frontliners. So Pelosi has been relying on moderates to get legislation through and telling progressives, you can fuck off and you're just going to have to vote for us. But at the moment, if the moderates and the progressives join forces behind her back, her entire governing strategy kind of falls apart.
Right. And I think the way that she has been trying to protect those frontline Democrats is by having them not have to vote on any sort of like big idea like this.
Yeah.
But I think that what her miscalculation is that when you look at poll after poll after poll, it's a big idea that everybody is really clamoring for right now.
Also, these moderate frontliners were elected to enact big ideas. These are districts that are Republican districts that took a chance on something different because what they were doing wasn't working. There is no, like, one thing that the progressives and this moderate frontliner caucus have in common is it's a lot of freshmen. And all of these freshmen were put in office because people wanted something to change.
Get something done.
So
right, yeah, totally.
I think that they actually share a lot of the same priorities, and maybe, they're like, I don't think that this is the caucus that gets Medicare for all done, but it's certainly a caucus that could get a lot of economic policy and anti-corruption work done. And I've been kind of shocked that no one has thought to do that yet, because there are all of these like little caucuses inside the Democratic Party that are, there's the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is like a caucus of impossible people. And there's the Progressive Caucus, which is a caucus of fake progressives. And there's all these tiny caucuses that never get to do anything because they don't have quite enough members to make a difference. And they don't want, the Republicans to get their, they don't want it to they don't want everything policy to swing to the right. So they're trying to sort of be protectionist. But like, actually, I think a lot of these caucuses, especially given the hundreds or so freshmen that are part of them, were brought in because there was a real need for swifter change. And people would, I think, be willing to enact interesting policy. I mean, you see that with a lot of the freshmen who have been a little bit more high profile. That's part of what's so interesting about Katie Porter.
Right, because she's now one of the people who is supportive of this. It's got 93 co-sponsors.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, part of the reason why we were so upset that it didn't make it into that HEROES Act. Because granted, it's got some new support as of this week, but it had broad support last week when they decided just not to include it. It was an amendment to that bill that had been written already and was on Pelosi's desk that just sort of like was left to the side.
Yeah, well, it's an idea that should not be partisan. It's not, because we're seeing the Senate Republicans take it up as well. It's an idea that's just like common sense in this moment.
Right. Well, and that I think is sort of like here's some other of the interesting bedfellows here that we're having.
Right.
So many bedfellows.
This is an issue with many bedfellows, none of whom are party leadership for some reason.
Because
none of whom are wearing protection.
Too true. But this idea is an idea that Josh Hawley, who's a Republican from Missouri, has been also pushing for months, like since early April here. And just recently now, he is getting some support from Cory Gardner, who you may know as easily the most, the Republican Senate candidate who is most likely to lose in November. So he is also
a Republican Senate candidate who has been going out of his way to sponsor big idea legislation and bipartisan idea legislation because he knows he's in danger.
Right. But their plan would do exactly what we discussed earlier. It would allow people to pay their employees 80%. It would also give financial support, both to rehire workers at like additional cost. So I think it allows them to like repay those people at 120%, basically to like make up for back pay. And we also learned this week that they are working with Jayapal's office, Josh Hawley's office. Josh Hawley, lunatic fringe candidate from Missouri. Although, I mean, sort of like a quasi-populist, but like he's a nut job.
Yeah.
And Cory Gardner, which
is saying a lot,
like run-of-the-mill Republican who's worried about his reelection, is working with the head of the Progressive Caucus in the House.
This is though exactly what I think. There has been like this. The things are stuck in the middle somewhere. But like this is something that this is Bernie Sanders has done this all the time, time and again, where he's found like some lunatic on the right to co-sponsor.
Right, it's like sponsoring bills with Mike Lee up a storm.
Exactly. This works if you can find common ground with offices on the other side of the aisle. Then that feels like a broadly popular thing to do that maybe everyone could get behind. And what's really holding it up is it's not a priority for like this sort of entrenched political right or left. It's like populists on either side. And this is, to be fair, like a fairly populist idea, but like, sorry, that's where the country's at right now, is we're in a populist
Well, that's what we need
era,
too. Like that's what we know that this would work. And that's what bugs me about this. And hearing that Cory Gardner is now signing on to the Hawley bill in the Senate is also just giving me a lot of anxiety politically, because Republicans are better at politics than we are. And if they decide that this is a good idea and it might actually work, then they don't care. They won't care whether it came from the Progressive Caucus or not. They will do it, and then they'll claim it as their own. And that is what gives me a little anxiety, because I just fear that, and Democrats do this all the time, but like it's just ceding a good idea to Senate Republicans, and like don't do that.
Well, Democrats are great at being doormats. I mean, that's
true. That's
our motto.
Exactly. I also think
I just like, I can't let we can't let Josh Hawley be the hero that saves us from the economic scourge of coronavirus. Like,
and also what we lose in allowing the GOP in seeding this idea to the GOP is meaningfully connecting it to other kinds of benefits that would also help people. So like if they think that this is the solution to the problem, but they think that in opposition to our unemployment insurance extensions and things like that, then we actually don't gain as much as if we do this as part of a broader package where, this is not going to save every job in America. This kind of legislation is not going to save jobs that have already been lost. We still need it to extend unemployment insurance.
We do.
If they are going to make the Democrats with you're the party of unemployment and we're the party of protecting business, small businesses, because we came up with this, the Paycheck Protection Act, basically, which is something
we've waited long enough on the
Paycheck Guarantee
Paycheck Protection Act that you still also need unemployment insurance.
Exactly. And so I'm worried that in ceding this to the GOP, we also lose a sort of broader suite of benefits that would have been part of a Democratic package, because this is not on its own enough. And their idea is it on its own.
Right. It is, right. They don't want to do any more unemployment insurance.
Exactly.
Right. Oh no, they could have been good with it like a month ago.
Yeah, totally.
They were mad that minimum wage workers 2 months ago were in danger of making more money than they had made, but hadn't yet. Yeah. They were incensed by the idea.
And what I'll say about that is because, like, while I agree with needing the unemployment insurance, had we done something like this early, then we wouldn't also have to be dealing with the problems of what's going to come from the unemployment insurance later. Because while we do need it, and while I think it's ridiculous that like the Republicans are sort of like, oh, well, it's a disincentive to work, there still are economic problems that are going to come, especially when companies open back up and people have been making more money. Like yes, that's a sign that they were probably not making enough money. But like also like you can't expect these businesses who have already sort of like lost capital and are barely scraping by to pay rent to also be able to meet the amount of money that people have been making on unemployment insurance. So like having passed something like this months ago, you would have also alleviated the problems that we're going to have with the unemployment insurance like on the back end.
Yeah, acclimation is going to be an absolute shit show. An absolute shit show.
Yeah.
Fortunately, everything is going to be a shit show. So
I know. Well, and we're seeing proof of that actually, because Georgia was one of the early states to open up, and
volunteer Georgia, right? Volunteered to prostrate themselves for our scientific benefit.
To save the economy. But you know what they haven't done by reopening early? Saved the economy.
Or gotten their unemployment claims down.
Right. Georgia now leads the country in percentage of people who are on unemployment right now, or who have filed for unemployment.
Yeah. 40.3% of their state's workers have filed for unemployment. That's almost half of the workforce of Georgia.
And it's in part because people still are sort of like not quite comfortable with like going out. And there's like, it's also like, it's a lagging indicator in Georgia. Like people are still like, these claims are like still sort of like being counted. But like also it's just because like some of these businesses are not going to come back for the reasons that we stated. So like these people are going to stay unemployed because there's not going to be jobs for them to go back to. Which brings me to another complaint that I have about that stupid HEROES Act from last week. Because if we're going to get ourselves into a place where there are no jobs to go back to, one thing that would be nice would be some sort of a federal jobs program, potentially maybe some sort of Green New Deal, which was also something that was specifically left out of that bill.
Don't be ridiculous, Brent. We should just pay people to not work and not even worry about whether they're ever going to be able to work again or whether we can rebuild our crumbling infrastructure in this moment of opportunity.
We should be lucky that they're even considering a second lofty payment of $1,200 for everyone. The fact that it's even being discussed, we should feel so grateful.
Some like $1,200 whole dollars
in May.
Right. I know.
Well, we're desperate to not fix this.
Right. Or we're desperate to do like the least possible thing that we can do. And that's what I think that so many, and that's what I wish people would sort of like get. I feel like people need to get that out of their heads. Like, I just feel like I've seen so many people this week who are like, well, that bill is like better than nothing. Or like people signing, petitions to like ask your congressperson to pass this. And it's like, first off, you don't know what's in there, I can guarantee. Because you but also like.
These are people that feel strongly about the lobbying industry, Brent. Don't assume that they don't love lobbyists and feel desperate, a need for them to continue to make the income that they would.
But I just wish that we could like get out of the thinking of like, well, it's better than nothing.
Well, that's our only way of thinking. Well, but then no, I think that's actually not always, that's not true as a long game. Like in the short term, we need something to happen now, which is why it's better than nothing, because right now people are like starving, literally.
Oh, right.
But as a long game, it's not actually better than nothing to pay out huge corporations huge amounts of money to bail out industries that are not necessary to the functioning of our society, and to not provide meaningful support to regular people and small businesses. I feel like as a long game strategy, that's actually fairly destructive. And so as much as it's okay to say it's better than nothing in the sense that like someone needs to get some money to some states so people can get fucking food stamps and stuff. Like, people, there are benefits that are critical to people's like actual existence that are necessary, that are in this, but we should not be required to throw away our future in order to have those things. And there is no reason that they need to be tied together this way.
It shouldn't be an either or.
Right. It's not actually better than nothing. It's just different than nothing. It's like a long-term nothing as opposed to a short-term nothing. And like, I think that's another thing. The Democrats have like for years been throwing away our future to save our present. They think in these very short-term bursts where they sell ideas that are not in the long-term beneficial to us as sort of short-term fixes to a problem they'll deal with down the road, but they never deal with the problem down the road. I mean, that's how our healthcare system ended up the way that it is right now. That's why we don't have any meaningful environmental legislation to, that can't be undone by a few executive orders. That's all the sort of large vision thinking that may have happened in history. All we've done is protect pieces of it that have already started to erode, as opposed to protecting the sort of our ability to have it, like protecting
the long-term plan. It's all
right.
It's all short-term planning.
It's all short-term
the excitement of getting a win.
Right.
Exactly. Any kind of win.
I think that's a big part of it, actually.
Yeah, and I think it's actually been fairly destructive to our party, but it's also what the Republicans have been doing as well. It's been part of the larger political culture, which means that we have no adults in the room. Like without any adults in the room, and the people that think they're adults in the room keep coming into the room and saying, well, let's slow down. And that's all they say. Like, it's like a bunch of daughters.
They're like knocking on death's door.
It's like
and they're coming into the room without masks. Like they're doing it all wrong.
They wander in and they're just like, let's not be hasty. And then they don't have like a second clause to that sentence. They just out.
Oh my God, you just described our vice president, our old vice president that's going to be running for president.
Exactly.
Oh man.
That's speaking of.
I know.
Hey, did you guys hear about Joe Biden's interview on the Breakfast Club?
I watched the interview.
I know. I am impressed and flabbergasted.
I sacrificed myself to take in that experience.
I know. Great. Tell us everything.
Okay. Well, first off, he coughed at least 3 times.
Oh,
no.
God.
And didn't address it. In the age of COVID-19,
you can't just be coughing on TV.
On a public interview and cough.
Yeah.
And not
gotta have like a fun little
fears of what that is. Like,
wait, you have to at least be like allergies. You have to do something.
Right.
I'd rather you make a COVID-19 joke than like say nothing at all and just roll on through your old white man tirade to tell people how to be black or not.
That's what the interview was already like going in a weird direction, right? Because an aide tried to get Biden out early.
Yep.
And Charlemagne was like, you can't do that on black media. And Biden said, I do that on white media and black media because my wife has to go on at 6:00. P.S. These are all Zoom interviews. Currently, we're on Zoom in like our bedrooms. Like,
right.
His wife did not need the studio to
Right.
go on.
Also, do they only have one computer? Erica, you're using 2 computers right now.
I have 2
Does Joe Biden only have one computer?
I think computer is actually, that would be amazing if he had that.
That's fair.
One singular.
An individual computer.
Speaking of computers, I need to plug in real quick, but keep talking.
Okay. Charlemagne then tells Biden that he should come back for another interview because, quote, we've got more questions.
In the studio.
To the studio. Like later, he's like, they record in New York, and he was like, oh, come, also every presidential candidate goes on the Breakfast Club. So this is not like a thing that is a surprise that he might need to go back on the Breakfast Club. He's not officially the candidate yet. In any case.
Well, you know why he needs to ask more questions? Because he only got to ask like 2.
Right, because it's like a
literally
5-second
Biden
interview.
Just went on this, like, to be honest, there's so many times that Biden has spoken publicly that would give anyone pause to have him ever speak again publicly on behalf of anyone.
I know.
And in this case, I literally was like, why is the old man yelling from the box?
It's like, we've said this a million times on the podcast. He is currently winning the election doing nothing from his basement. Like,
keep him there.
Doing that.
I want to know what aide was like, we should definitely say yes to the Breakfast Club right now. They're going to shit talk him now forever. Why not let them shit talk him because he hasn't come on yet because he can't figure out how to use his computer? Like, that could have been an innocent, stupid thing. And now instead what we have is Biden replying to Charlemagne when Charlemagne asks, will you come back? You've got more questions? Well, I tell you what, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
Right, and that's exactly what every black person wants to hear. An old white
they
man
needed Joe Biden to
if
tell
they are
them
black or not,
whether or not they were black.
Mm-hmm. Lovely.
People really love when old white men wander into a room to tell them what their own identity is and like that was like, there are so many problems with it also because the syntax is weird. Like he's also like maybe like mocking Black English it was so weird. I felt like it's like he wasn't prepped or he went off script or where did he get this idea that he thought he needed to emulate what his idea of how Black people speak? Like, where did that come from?
Because he saw Hillary Clinton do it in 2016.
And Hillary Clinton.
I mean,
it's a tradition
beloved
by white politicians.
His aide must have felt like, like a news show or like the morning show, on Apple, when in the control room, roll the commercial, he couldn't do it. And that must have felt awful.
About this aide in the first place and all the aides, because someone had said to me, well, he should have just not said that, when I was like, they shouldn't have let him go on. And I was like, the thing is, this is what you get when you invite Joe Biden to go on somewhere. So like the choice you're making is not between someone who says something stupid or doesn't say something stupid. The choice you're making is between someone who is either not being interviewed or is being interviewed. Like there is not like a world in which you can control for Joe Biden saying something offensive during the interview. He has a long history of not being able to handle anyone questioning him for any reason in any form.
Right.
He's told people on the campaign trail to vote for Donald Trump multiple times. He told Brent and I just the other week not to vote for him. So he's got a long history of not being able to handle even a minor amount of needling from anybody.
It's like asking an alligator not to eat someone if they walk into a Florida lagoon. Like, it's going to happen.
Well, and also I think Joe Biden really, he feels too safe on Black media for the kind of questioning and he deserves based on his record. And I think that is kind of, what Charlemagne went on CNN the next day, gave an interview about it to Aaron Burnett. And that's basically what he said is he was like, I want to hear about what people are doing for my community now, not what they did for it 30 years ago. But also we're talking about the man who wrote the 94 crime bill.
Well, and that's what a lot of that interview was about also, which I think is where he got so sort of got defensive about because
he got
was having
so
to answer
defensive. He got so defensive, and Charlemagne was like, "Listen, Hillary Clinton came on here and said, yeah, I was part of that bill, and and I regret it, and she apologized for it. And as we know, like that's not always happened, but if that's the barometer, and he couldn't meet that,
Yeah.
That's bad. Like he
we
was
know
so defensive.
we know that Joe Biden can't apologize, and he continued his non-apology tour on Friday with a comment about this interview, in which he was on a call with the U.S. Black Chamber of Commerce and said, "I shouldn't have been such a wise guy. I shouldn't have been so cavalier." That is not him saying, "I'm sorry I was such a wise guy, and I'm sorry I was so cavalier." Because I think the other thing that Charlemagne talked about in that Aaron Burnett interview was that Biden came in like he was taking the Black vote for granted because, he has already performed so well with Black voters that he doesn't need to campaign to them anymore.
And that's what I think
all the time with him. There's so many people he thinks he doesn't need to campaign to that he absolutely has to campaign to.
Well, and the thing that I think also potentially why Charlemagne was so probably himself surprised that this is how the interview went was because he has interviewed other people in this campaign cycle. He interviewed Elizabeth Warren, he interviewed Bernie Sanders, and I haven't heard those interviews, but I would all but guarantee you that if he asked them specifically to say, why should Black people vote for you? I bet they both had really great answers.
They had answers. Well, they had answers, right?
Right.
And then they happened to be very articulate and thought out.
Yes.
The answers
and so I think that was probably
on its head.
So Charlemagne also was probably expecting to get an answer.
I mean,
oh my God, he just got white-splained and yelled at for the entire time.
Yet meanwhile,
this is your show.
That's literally why people go on his show it's literally a show you go on in the presidential cycle to tell Black voters why they should vote for you.
Right. Isn't that the show that Hillary Clinton said that she carried her hot sauce in her purse on?
I believe so. Yeah. It's where you go to pander to Black voters.
The hot interview for Hillary Clinton.
It's like the only reason that Joe Biden was talking to Charlemagne was to tell Black voters why they should vote for him. That's why he was on the show. They are not friends who hang out.
Right.
That was and by the way, that was clear. That was very clear. I also resent the fact that he said, "Oh my gosh, my cat keeps stepping on our audio." I resent the fact that he said that he was a wise guy because he was not a wise guy. That implies that he was making clever quips,
right?
At the expense of somebody else. There was nothing clever. There was nothing nuanced. There was nothing interesting about what he said. He just went on a tirade.
Just went on a weird tirade and then ended with an offensive comment about who is and is not Black in his opinion, which apparently is the only one that matters.
This is all we came away from knowing is that Joe Biden, you are certainly not Black.
Right. Well aware. And that brings us to a discussion about his Veep choice, because there's been a lot of speculation about who's on the short list, who's being vetted this week. And this incident on the Breakfast Club kind of ignited a new element of that conversation that was already sort of in the air. But, we had heard news earlier in the week that he was vetting Amy Klobuchar, and everyone lost their minds. That would be the Tim Kaine-ish choice he could possibly.
Oh my gosh, please.
And then there's a few, Jeanne Shaheen declined to be vetted, so that's funny. Maggie Hassan agreed to. Gretchen Whitmer is being vetted. Val Demings is being vetted. That was the sort of new name that floated in this week. And then we have the sort of old line names that we've been hearing, the Stacey Abrams, Kamala Harris, Liz Warren, Catherine Cortez Masto, and Michelle Lujan Grisham. But the recent Klobes talk was already not sitting well with Black activists. And then add to that now Charlemagne's voice, who told the Washington Post, I think that would be suicide for Joe Biden's campaign. If he did that, especially at this moment after the comments that he made, he would be a fool not to put a Black woman as his running mate. And he is not the only person saying that. A lot of strategists and activists and such are saying similar things. But interestingly, one thing, Politico had a whole big, long article about it. But one thing that they noted in the article was that there are other candidates who fit Klobuchar's sort of general demographic profile who do not inspire this kind of frustration from activists in the Black community. Like they are not, there is not the same sort of antagonism when you mention an Elizabeth Warren figure as there is against Amy Klobuchar. Amy Klobuchar, I think because she was a prosecutor and
I was gonna say she has specific problems with Black voters.
Problems with Black voters, and also because she couldn't get any to vote for her. Couldn't get any Black voters to vote for her.
Part of the equation.
In the last election. is somebody who is like especially problematic to a lot of the people they interviewed, at least. But also like the logic that Biden's team has employed to explain why they're considering Amy Klobuchar is some of the Tim Kaine-iest logic I've ever heard in my life. Like, there's a sentence in this Politico article that says that Biden's team has made clear that the electoral politics of his pick matter less than choosing someone who can be a governing partner and step into the top job without worry. And that's why Hillary Clinton said she chose Tim Kaine. And as much as that should be true of anyone picking a running mate, so this sentence should not have had to be said. What he's meaning to imply here is that he's not necessarily interested in picking somebody who lends him any electoral strengths. And there are a number of electoral strengths that he needs to be lent at the moment, which I think is, and they're not the ones he thinks.
And I think that he is delusional about the reason that he was chosen himself also, because I think that he was chosen because like Barack thought that he could just like step in on day one. And he may have thought that, but like the reason that he was added to that ticket was because he was working class Joe.
That's right.
Obama needed to shore up white working class people. And that's why Biden himself was added. And you always pick a VP for a specific reason, right? The reason that Mike Pence was added to that ticket was because Trump had problems with evangelicals.
Like, that's
like you
how doesn't now.
It doesn't now. No. But to say that you don't pick a vice president to fill some sort of gap that's needed is just crazy. I think the problem is, and we've talked about this when we've talked about Veep stakes on this podcast, I'm not certain that anybody on that list of people that we know is being vetted or might ever be vetted at some point is really the perfect answer to like the main problems that he has, which are not white Midwesterners. He'll be fine with white Midwesterners and he'll be fine with Black people. The issues that he has had ongoing through the entire primary in state after state across the country is young people and Latinos. And I don't know which of these people comes the closest to solving that. I don't know. I don't know that I have an answer.
Yeah.
I mean, on some level, I think
Amy Klobuchar. I mean,
it certainly isn't Amy Klobuchar.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, on some level, I'm almost feeling like if none of those people solve a specific issue, then maybe it does behoove him to pick a Black woman and just try and drive that turnout as high as humanly possible. I don't know. I don't know what, because it's going to take a huge turnout on his part to like be actually able to win this. I don't know what the answer is.
I think that part of the issue he's having is exactly what we saw him express on the Breakfast Club, though, which is that he thinks that he is enough to drive Black voters to the polls.
Right.
And I think what we're seeing in the people that this article interviewed and what we're seeing in other media about this is that a lot of people who are either activists or strategists in the Black community do not think that's true. And I think that's where we sort of have an essential problem. I think for some reason, Joe Biden has this impression that he is the guy who brings Black voters to the polls, but not the guy who brings like white working class voters to the polls. And that's the opposite of reality. But their campaign has been operating as it, remember early on where they were just like, in like New Hampshire, they were like, well, white voters just don't want to vote for Joe Biden. That's why he's coming in fifth. And I was like, he was added to Obama's ticket to bring in white voters. He himself is not a guy who drives Black votes. Like, he is just like a guy who was part of like a successful sort of vaguely credible moderate ticket that like also gave us the first Black president. And like, it's nice that he was part of that, but like his electoral strength can't just be them presuming that he drives a huge amount of turnout in the Black community. I think what we are seeing these analysts saying, who are people that are coming out of the Black community and also the Latino community, is that is just not true. That someone needs to be added to the ticket who can drive turnout in those communities for him, because he himself is not actually going to drive turnout in those communities. He is going to he's not going to drive turnout in any community in particular, aside from maybe like a few like moderate white people somewhere. But like, it's
in your homes.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But like the main thing I took away from this article, and then also just from sort of watching the fallout to that interview on the Breakfast Club unfold, has been that people who actually work with voters in the Black community do not think that he has this electoral strength that he is acting like he has there.
Well, and isn't this feel like this is the population deficit that the working class vote for Hillary Clinton's campaign was? Isn't this assumption that that's going to be just fine and that he doesn't need to put effort into reaching them? Like that just feels like 2016 all over again, a different population.
Yeah. Well, and the idea that he thinks he doesn't need to put an effort to reaching whole swaths of the voting populace, like he's not, young people, Latino voters, Black
Right,
voters.
because we talked last week about like his lack of Latino voter outreach,
Yeah.
which is like sparse at best.
Right, he's not doing outreach to any of these communities. He's not doing outreach to younger voters. When he tries to do outreach to either of them, it fails spectacularly because going on the Breakfast Club is you trying to do outreach to Black voters, and that's what occurred when he did that. And like now, this sort of talk about Amy Klobuchar as a potential running mate, and they dropped that name specifically to see what the public reaction would be, has freaked everyone out fully.
The one thing that I will say about that, though, besides the pushback that he is getting from, Black and Latino leaders on the Amy Klobuchar
and Lila
floating
Nordstrom.
that, and Lila Nordstrom, is that I have been
like everyone.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I have been excited by the amount of hatred for that pick that I have seen on my own social media from people who are totally vote blue no matter who are probably going to vote for Biden unless he, short of picking Satan as his vice presidential candidate. Like, and these people are like, please, God.
Yeah.
Like,
because the vice president candidate is the one consolation we could potentially get out of this president. It's the only one. So if you take that away, there is absolutely so little motivation to vote other than ousting Trump, which is such a shitty way to campaign.
It is.
Well, and also, I mean, I was watching.
Well, they're banking on that too.
But. Well, and they're also somebody somewhere I saw commented something on like Twitter or whatever that was like, they're fighting as if the choice is between Biden and Trump, but it's actually between staying home and Biden. And like, they're absolutely not acting like the real battle they're fighting is to get people out of their chairs. It is not to get people to not vote for Trump. The risk is not that Black voters are going to vote for Donald Trump in huge numbers.
Right.
The risk is not that young people are going to vote for Donald. It's that they're not going to show up.
Right.
And
because
they're going to lose with low turnout. We're going to lose the House with low turnout too.
Exactly.
Yeah. They're not represented. So what's the incentive to show up?
Exactly. Well, and that's I think how a lot of people, myself included, have been feeling in this cycle, which is just like, there is nowhere on any presidential ticket where I am represented. So, I mean, obviously I'm going to vote, but I understand the feeling.
Right. And you wouldn't be represented any longer if you picked Elizabeth Warren either.
No. Oh my God, you guys, she's really turning herself inside out to try to get on this ticket.
Because I would have I never thought that he was going to pick her anyway, and he's been floating excuses as to why, because the Republican governor would pick a person, even though they have very quick turnaround special elections. They would have an election, I think, within like 100 days or something like that. So like, it's a crappy reason not to pick her. I think it's been clear he's not going to pick her for a while.
Yeah.
But she's twisting herself into knots to try and get picked, it would appear.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that that's a great idea, because the reason that people would want her on the ticket would be people like you and I. And by saying that you're no longer for Medicare for all, which is what she said this week, and that's the story that we're about to do, I feel like she sort of negates any reason that you would want her to be the vice president. Like if she just sort of decides that she agrees with him on everything and throws all of her past positions out the window, then it's like the left is no longer excited about Liz Warren being the vice president. I mean, I'd be more excited about her being the VP than Amy Klobuchar, certainly.
I was going to say, she's in a kind of tough spot because she shares so little politically with Joe Biden.
Right.
That, I mean, like, I'm upset about what she's been up to, but I've also been, I think, less surprised and angry about it than I thought I would be, because I think she's kind of gotten herself into a tough bind. She got herself there. She started to put herself in this bind during the primary. So it's not, this is sort of a continuation of sort of poor judgment we saw in the primary that she made about how to kind of cave on principled issues, in a way that made people on the left a little disenchanted with her. But I do sort of feel like, okay, if she has any shot of being a running mate for someone like Joe Biden, who is very obviously looking to pick somebody who essentially aligns with his moderate positions or plans to do nothing, then she has to be kind of clever about how she frames her policy at the moment. And the reason that she's not going to be his running mate, unless short of something bizarre and catastrophic happening, is because of his donors. It's because his donors will never let that happen. But she is trying to bring a lot of fundraising prowess to his campaign in an effort to combat that, because that's really the major holdup. And then the other holdup is that, it tarnishes her brand. So she's having to twist herself into pretzels, trying to figure out how to connect the two brands in order to seem like she's a person who could be a governing partner to him. And I see why she's doing it. I'm not happy that she's doing it. I don't necessarily feel like if she ends up on the ticket, I'm suddenly relieved that a quote unquote progressive is on the ticket, because she's showing that she's kind of willing to be, those issues are malleable. But I'm also kind of wondering if this is, how do you play smart inside the tent? I think there are very few options. You can be AOC and you can just be like, I will be a singular voice outside the tent, essentially. You can be someone who is willing to get a death threat every day and be a singular voice outside the tent and have tons of money pour into opposition for you and all of this. Or once you're invited into the tent, how do you sort of make it so that you accomplish as much as you can inside the tent? And I think Warren's had a hard time historically sort of grappling with how to balance those two needs. And so what we're seeing is that she's sort of folding to the needs of being inside the tent. But I feel at least like that this is a character flaw that we saw emerge early on. So I feel like I see what's going on here and what she's up to. I'm just sort of oh, now, we've lost another one. Because so the issue is that this week she was talking to students at U Chicago's Institute of Politics, and said, I think right now people want to see improvements in our healthcare system, and that means strengthening the Affordable Care Act. She added later that she eventually wants to get to single payer, but basically people took that as a sign that she's sort of heading in Biden's dumb talking point about strengthening the ACA's direction. And I think, obviously we have talked at length, and probably we'll talk more in just a minute, about why this is the dumbest possible of policies and that we absolutely should not focus our energy on strengthening the ACA. But her and Biden wrote an op-ed together about oversight on the coronavirus relief packages. She's got these COVID, proposals coming fast and furious. She's trying to kind of look like she could be a partner to Joe Biden.
Her policy team is working with the Biden team. Supposedly her policy team has emerged as the favorites of the Biden team, which makes me wonder what the hell these task forces are even for.
Well, I mean,
the Sanders team. But,
also, of course they are, because they're smart, competent people.
Well, right.
He didn't have policy people before this, you guys. Yeah. He was just running on his aviators or whatever.
Right.
On old Joe fumes.
Exactly.
That's right. But
it's frustrating because this is a wrong economic policy to expand the ACA. Right.
That's what I think. Before we move on from the story, we would be remiss, even though we do it near weekly on this podcast. But
that's what you love about us, right?
Right. Exactly. We can't leave this story without telling you that only expanding the Affordable Care Act right now is the worst plan. And I mean, we didn't like the plan 6 months ago because we felt like it was inadequate. But if ever anything was inadequate ever, it's expanding the ACA for now, when so many people have lost their employment-based health insurance, and also when people who didn't have their insurance through their employers already were probably paying for an ACA plan, and now they're out of work and they're supposed to continue paying for it with what money? Expanding the ACA it's bad policy right now. It just doesn't make any sense.
It was
so for her to say that right now, it's the worst possible time for her to be putting that into the world.
Yeah, and the medical fallout that's going to happen after the dust settles with, and who knows when that's going to be. There's still going to be some dust settling while we're actually fighting the pandemic itself. But when it does slow down, there's going to be so many supplemental problems that we're dealing with on the medical front, that this now more than ever, we need to have adequate healthcare. It's time.
I mean, this is something I did an interview on CBS about this just recently. So,
oh yeah.
Wow. Dropping network letters.
This is exactly what I was talking about, actually, is I was there to talk about what, after the sort of initial pandemic dust settles, what kinds of fallout we're going to see, both in terms of people's actual health, but also in terms of access issues, and how a government's long-term pandemic response can't emulate what happened to us after 9/11, and specifically why it might. So this is something that I think is actually part of a much larger discussion right now, which is why it's frustrating to hear anybody who is normally a credible human being parrot this for the sake of talking points at this exact moment. But this is what this is. She's just switched to a talking point. This is like just shows that all conversation about healthcare from her is meaningless right now. Like, we don't know what her plan is right now, because her plan is talking points. Because if you can easily switch this, expanding the ACA doesn't mean anything. That's a talking point too. That's not a plan. That expanding the ACA is such a complicated and ridiculous undertaking that would expand such specific parts of the healthcare marketplace that have nothing to do with the situation most people are in right now, that it's not even worth discussing as if it's an idea that you're having. Like, it's like that's not actually like a policy idea. That's just sort of like a fuzzy thing to say, a fuzzy feeling you can have.
Well, do we think, but let me ask you this, do we think that this is how she felt all along, but was dodging that when she was still in contention? Or do we think this is her political maneuvering and compromising to get herself on the ticket?
Here's what I think. I think that she knew that realistically the options we'd be left with were expanding the ACA, and that she was doing what we hope everyone does in this situation, and saying the goal so that we could get farther towards the goal. So like, I don't think that she thought, even as she released her Medicare for All plan, that we were on our way to having Medicare for All. I think she thought someone has to lay out a plan so that we can start with a plan. And even if this plan changes, which it will, at least someone's tried, at least someone's put the detail work in. Because I think one thing about the Sanders bill is that it has almost no details. And so a lot of people who are on the real policy side find that bill very frustrating, because it doesn't actually explain how the system would work like meaningfully. And
like
it's
the way that she laid out in more detail.
It's more of a placeholder bill. And because no one was taking the policy seriously until recently, nobody was figuring out how the details would work. And so she was the first person who kind of like decided she could try to figure out how the details work. And that was a flawed plan. And it was also a stupid plan, but it did open the door to people at least thinking, okay, well, if we had Medicare for All, what would we actually have? Which was new and exciting. So I think all along she was aware that expanding the ACA was the option she would be left with. And I think she also, to some extent, having been in the Senate for a while now, was sort of like not able to think as broadly as somebody who's like an AOC who comes in from the outside and is just like, we should have this whole other thing. So
I agree with you.
Tied to the ACA plans.
I don't think she all of a sudden lost a moral compass. Like,
no, this is just a political choice. It's just shitty timing for that kind of a political choice. That's kind of what I'm saying. Like, it's not, I see what happened here, and I'm not surprised it happened. I'm just sort of like, ugh,
I know, right now, when we need to be doing literally the exact opposite of that.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's just like, this is the wrong time for her to have made a political calculation that, has her sort of stating the other implicit side of her healthcare policy, which is that, yes, obviously, especially in the plan that she laid out, we were going to have to expand the ACA.
Yeah.
So,
but doesn't this go hand in hand with what you both have talked a lot about in your podcast, is having this aversion to presenting what you think you can eke by with on a bipartisan level, instead of really going after what you want and having the faith that the voters that elected you, that this is what they want, this is what they have said that they want. But instead we end up with just slivers of an idea related to that. I
mean, yes. And I think the latest Medicare for All poll nationally that I saw recently was like at 74% or something. It's like it's a overwhelming majority of Republicans now want this idea. So it's like, I think it also just doesn't, I think it's bad politics to sort of like, to do this anyway. I think it's bad politics of Joe Biden to be running on it.
Totally.
I think it's bad politics for everybody.
Yeah, no, it's bad politics for everyone except
not
people,
where the country
except fundraisers. It's a fundraiser. No, it's fully a fundraising issue. This is one of those issues. This has nothing to do with public opinion. There are two things standing in the way of Medicare for all. It's hard, and no one wants to figure out how to do it. And the donor situation. There's whole industries that would have to be restructured because of it, and the donors don't want to let that happen. They're very worried about what would happen. They're worried about their taxes because they're rich people. They're worried about their industries because they work in insurance. They're worried about the millions and billions of dollars they make over selling us drugs that are much too expensive because they work in pharma. Like the issue is money. It's a money issue. It has nothing to do with the public.
Yeah.
If I were running for president right now and I wanted to be a corrupt person who still gets billions of dollars in donations, I would just say the health insurance and pharma world are the only places I'm not willing to accept donations from. Oil and gas, come at me. Like if I were trying to be an asshole who's a centrist, who doesn't want to hurt corporate America, I would still decide that I had to draw the line at
who had a modicum of a moral compass, was like,
just for public,
this is what I'm gonna die on.
For the votes.
Right.
Who even cares if you believe it? It's for the votes.
Yeah.
But we saw her, this is what killed our interest in her campaign, is this kind of needling towards the middle. So like, I don't think that I'm surprised that this is a path that she's choosing to pursue, because she kept in with the healthcare discussion trying to find the middle of a conversation that really couldn't have a sort of compromise as she was framing it. Like there is a compromise between single payer and private health insurance, but it exists in a world where we already have single payer and we add private options onto that plan. It doesn't exist in a world where we have the choice to have public or private healthcare.
Well, and trying to figure this out has ruined many a people. I mean, honestly, I mean, like not very many people have necessarily tried, but I mean, Kamala Harris tried to get there also. We remember her healthcare bill, which was even more cockamamie than Warren's was, but it was like,
way more
it was like some 20-year glide path to Medicare for all where we phased out insurance. Like it was like a whole situation. So it's not, easy.
But Liz is going one further in her moral decay. Because she's also going to host a high dollar fundraiser for Biden.
From the woman who wouldn't take any large donations.
Leading the charge. Wasn't even going to meet with donors. Now,
okay, let's stuff the pockets of a predator.
That's right. Stuff the pockets of a predator with my own Senate donors.
Oh, man. Come on. Don't be doing that.
Not great.
That's not great. And also, we're never going to know what happens at these fundraisers because Joe Biden has been kicking the pool reporters out of them.
You guys.
Who is he, Donald Trump?
Yeah, they just changed policy. So originally their policy was they were going to be very transparent. They went on and on about how transparent they were going to be.
Right, because at the beginning of the primary, there was a lot of talk about this because both Sanders and Warren said that they weren't going to take any big money. Well, they were pressing other people to commit to do the same thing. People didn't.
It was related to the Clinton speeches.
Of course.
It was the Goldman Sachs speeches. It was the reason we specifically noted that in this specific area, we were not going to have closed door events.
Right.
Because no one wanted to go through the Hillary Clinton speech era again.
Right. And so up until now, he has been actually committed to that. Like there were reporters at the Joe Biden fundraisers.
Mm-hmm.
But they are not any longer.
Thursday.
Yeah.
He was holding a phone event or, a virtual event for that was hosted by 3 investment banking firm heads. And there was a reporter who heard him give his remarks who was on the line, except the reporter was limited to telephone access and not Zoom access like everyone else. Which is also new. And then as soon as he began taking questions, the call just ended.
Yeah.
And so the pool reporter wrote in her pool notes, the pool report was written based on just opening remarks because your pooler was quickly kicked out of the phone call when Biden said he was ready to take questions from any of the 25 donors present, a move that goes against traditionally covering these pooled fundraisers in their entirety. Also, reporters heard Biden over the phone, not through Zoom, as has been common practice in the virtual campaign era. His deputy campaign manager, Rufus Gifford, said, tonight's event was a new format as we enter a new phase of the general election campaign. You're not in the general election campaign yet, dude.
A new format. They just discovered Zoom at the Biden campaign.
That's right.
But do you think he didn't know like what time it was in the year? Like maybe he just thought we
It
were
was just like, we're in.
already there.
It's October.
Right. Like maybe he legit thought it was early November.
But then also, Rufus Gifford goes on to basically say that they're committed to transparency because this vastly exceeds anything Donald Trump's campaign has offered. As if that's the barometer we're using here.
Okay.
Like,
Wait,
we're gonna
real quick on one of his donors. Do you know that the president of Goldman Sachs is also a DJ?
What?
Oh my god.
What kind of DJ? Like a DJ
He's a
who does
DJ that's like performed with Paul Oakenfold. His name is DJ Diesel.
No.
Because David Solomon is his name. How upsetting is that?
No.
So upsetting.
Oh man.
I don't like
I don't know. It's such a like trend hunty like thing to do for the president of Goldman Sachs to be a DJ. It just it bothers me so much.
That's deeply
horrifying.
Upsetting.
Yeah.
It's horrifying and a nightmare.
Oh man.
Anyway, sorry, I just had to provide that.
No, that was
horrific.
You've really
that was
thrown me for a loop.
Horrific update, but I'm glad someone was here to share it.
Yes.
So we had another primary where people voted by mail.
No reports of fraud yet that I'm aware
Turns
of.
out,
no, not allowed. Can't do it.
Hawaii's primary was on Saturday. It was delayed by a few weeks because of coronavirus. Held entirely by mail. You know,
unless I can scan your proof of citizenship in person.
Right. Then
with my scan gun.
Right.
Exactly.
You gotta burn all these ballots. You gotta burn these harvested ballots. I love the ballot harvesting.
Oh yeah, ballot harvesting is my favorite.
Hearing about lately. Anyway, Biden won 63 to 37. Got 16 delegates. Sanders got 8 delegates.
I have a comment about this, which is that this doesn't feel like the kind of blowout result. Like I know this is a blowout technically in that Biden won by a huge margin.
It also seems like a margin that like anybody could have had like in February also.
I was gonna say like
sad that someone that's not in the race
is polling at almost 40% in Hawaii. Like,
oh my god,
consistently 30 to 40% of the party is like literally just not on board. These people voted for someone who is not in the race. And listen, if you have not voted yet, I am encouraging everyone to vote for the candidate you actually wanted in the primary.
That's why we have the primary.
Voted yet? They took away your vote. It was not your choice to pick Joe Biden as the candidate. You were not consulted. So make sure that they are forced to consult you at least a little. Like just because these people aren't in the race doesn't mean you shouldn't vote for them.
Mm-hmm.
Vote for anyone.
You know how there's like write-in candidates? I think we should start a movement of write-out candidates.
I love it. Here's who I'm absolutely not willing to.
Just voting. We get to vote no.
Everyone else is fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would love to be able. I would love if I could vote for someone and then also vote no on other people. Just to be clear about who was not acceptable.
Like it's like American Idol or whatever.
Right. Check all that are acceptable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to be able to vote no.
Oh, right. You could have like each person gets like 20 votes or something.
Right.
Oh yeah, you could divvy them up.
Spread them out in whichever manner you decide.
Sort of sounds a little bit like ranked choice voting.
It is, yes.
Which is something we could also consider.
Yes.
But yeah, I just like it's interesting to me that like we're still consistently in a place where like 30 to 40% of the party is just like not interested.
And yeah, I mean, who is?
And that's like a huge problem because first of all, that's a lot of the party. That's a lot of the votes they're going to need to drive to the polls. And a lot of those are coming from sectors of, considering who these people are voting for, which, candidates like Sanders, those are not votes that are guaranteed to show up for you in November.
Well,
this is full circle to what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Exactly. Speaking of vote by mail, though, there was a big dust up this week between Trump and Michigan. Trump didn't understand what Michigan was trying to do with their mail-in election.
I know.
He tweeted this week, he said, "Breaking. Michigan sends absentee ballots to 7.7 million people ahead of primaries and the general election. This was done illegally and without authorization by a rogue Secretary of State. I will ask to hold up funding to Michigan if they want to go down this voter fraud path."
Illegally. It's not
If
illegal.
And a rogue Secretary of State. But he also,
only they were sending 7.7 million people.
right, he got what they're doing wrong. They're doing the same, like,
cockamamie, ridiculous
word of the
plan
day,
as New York.
cockamamie, by the way.
That's right.
Drink if we say cockamamie. You'll be drunk.
All right.
But yeah, they're doing the same thing that New York is doing, where
and Wisconsin and all these bunch of other
right.
states.
They're not sending ballots. They're sending
they're sending absentee ballot
forms for you to fill out if you want a ballot.
Applications is the word.
Application. That's what the word
there we
is.
go.
That's the word.
New
Who
word
are
of the
we,
day.
Joe
Applications.
Biden? What's happening?
Yikes.
Ah,
Yes, they're sending out applications. So again,
which is
doing double mailers.
Completely unnecessary extra step that makes the election cost twice as much and lowers your turnout.
Doesn't make any sense. Anyway, but also some Republican states are doing this. Also, Iowa is doing this, and that's what the Secretary of State from Michigan tweeted back, and she said, "I also have a name. It's Jocelyn Benson." And then she noted that her office was sending applications, quote, like my GOP colleagues in Iowa, Georgia, Nebraska, and West Virginia. Trump deleted that original tweet and then posted like basically the exact same tweet, but said that they were absentee ballot applications, and then didn't reference the fact that he had messed it up the first time. Basically just like sent out a new tweet and pretended that the first tweet didn't exist.
He's perfect, Brent. He has the best words.
Yeah, exactly. He kind of seemed to walk it back because he got asked about what type of funding it was going to be, and he said that he, quote, had a very specific kind of funding in mind. But then didn't say what that specific kind of funding was. And then he said
very specific.
that he said he would keep the media apprised of whether a hold on funding would ultimately be necessary, but then said, I don't think it's going to be necessary.
No, that was solved.
A very specific kind of funding coming from Trump could like result in you having to sign an NDA and like never being able to speak again in a public forum. I do not like the sound of that coming from Trump.
No, it's not good. It's not good.
Not ideal.
Oh,
Trump's also been up to other shenanigans, like trying to make sure that people can get coronavirus at church.
Oh my God.
There
That's
aren't enough places.
All he wants.
Coronavirus these days. But it seems like a really effective place to spread coronavirus is church. We've seen that time and again.
Yeah, so, and we're gonna talk about a very specific, horrifying story where that happened in just a second. But he said at a press conference this week, he said, "I call upon governors to allow churches and places of worship to open right now. If there's any questions, they're going to have to call me, but they're not going to be successful in that call.
I'm not going to pick up the phone when they try, but they have to call me if they want to ask."
Right. The governors need to do the right thing and allow these very important, essential places of faith to open right now for this weekend. If they don't do it, I will override the governors. In America, we need more prayer, not less. Which makes me wonder, have people just not been praying this entire time?
Right. Is it Christians' fault that we are in coronavirus?
That they just didn't pray at home because they couldn't go to church?
I mean,
also, church, a friend of mine posted this quote from, it was either a pastor or a priest. I'm not good on knowing what those specifics are.
Which is which?
Clearly, this is my religion. But she basically, the quote was like, church is not a building. It's the church of the people.
Right.
It's not the building that provides you with spirituality.
Right. There's a lot of like infographics going around like that. The sort of like, the church is closed, but church is open, like stuff like that, basically.
Yeah, right. That sounds like a pretty like thin foundation if it requires a building for you to keep your faith.
Right. I know.
There's a New York Times article that was about a Quaker meeting group meeting on Zoom, but since in a Quaker meeting, you just sit silently together because no one's in charge and everyone just speaks as they want to speak. It was just like a lot of people sitting quietly on Zoom together.
Oh yeah, that's amazing. I wish more of my Zooms were like that.
I know.
I'm getting tired of listening to people on Zoom. Not you two. You two are perfect.
Perfect. We too have the best.
That's amazing to hear. You two are incredible, and I love your show. I'm with you, Brent, that I'm like zooming out. Instead of zooming in, I want to zoom out.
Right. Oh God.
Definitely
of course.
exhausting.
Of course, neither Trump or his press secretary could explain what overriding the governors meant on that, and there's no sort of like constitutional. But I mean, what's the Constitution these days?
What, what is any of this? He's saying word. It's just words.
Right. This is just a shout. It's a shout out to the base.
Yeah.
He's Joffrey. Like, he doesn't understand like any kind of rules that like work in a republic. Like, he doesn't, a federation. Right. Like, he doesn't, that like is, those are our words that like,
he's just saying what's on his mind.
Yeah.
Speaking the thoughts of his
right. And
mind.
He happened to be speaking those thoughts on the exact same day that the CDC released a report out of Arkansas about some spread that happened there.
Church spread.
Some church spread. Yes, that a bunch of cases where the first case was actually from patient 0 in this study was a pastor and his wife, and they ended up spreading to 35 people who attended events over the span of like 4 or 5 days at their rural Arkansas church. Only 90 people were at the church in that amount of time. So it was over a third of the people. 3 of them died. An additional 26 people in the community got coronavirus from those 35. So it ultimately passed to 51 people in a county that only has 250,000 people just from church events over the span of like 4 days.
25,000, not 250,000.
Oh, sorry, 25,000. Yes.
Yes.
Zeros. Too many zeros.
Well, it's hard with numbers. There's so many number things that are hard.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're seeing this story actually play out a lot in churches all over the country where like one person goes into a church and like 100 people walk out with coronavirus. And then we are left to hear about how they didn't believe it was true until it happened to them, which is like a way that you can save yourself a lot of trouble is believing things are true before they happen to you.
But also there are leaders within some of these religious organizations that are pushing back and saying, no, like stay home. The church will be here, like stay home and practice from home. But then they're getting, conflicting messages, of course, from Donald fucking Trump, but then also like bishops within their community.
Totally. I think it also depends on.
We're going to defy orders. Like, what are people supposed to follow?
I think it's also very much dependent on what part of the country that you're in too, because I saw something about like how Catholic churches in Florida or in Miami were going to open back up this week. But I go to an Episcopal church here, and there is no chance that I am in that until probably fall. And that's just because like mostly in Los Angeles, like the diocese, I think is probably sort of like has some semblance of like
sense
and is reading science things,
just reading
watching the news, has turned on the TV at some point in the last couple months.
But I think the confusion is certainly felt. Like I have a friend from college who's a pastor and posted this long thing about how she was staying home and how you can still feel God at home or whatever. And the way that it was phrased made it sound to me like members of her church had been asking her because they'd been hearing from other sources inside of the church that they should be going back, and no one was really sure what to do. And I think she's in like California or somewhere. I mean, she's not somewhere, where there would be a lot of pushback about this, but even there, they were just getting like a lot of mixed signals is how, I mean, that's how her response read to me, was that she was trying to say like, no, you can still be religious in your home, and you can also not die of coronavirus there. So that's both.
Coronavirus. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, was it the Holy Ghost Church where like the pastors died after they told people to come to the church, and then they died of coronavirus?
Maybe.
Oh, this sounds like a very church-forward story, though. This is the kind of story you're hearing about churches these days.
Yeah, I'm gonna
look
it up.
You're not hearing other stories about churches because churches where people aren't dying of coronavirus are also not going to church right now.
That's right. Yeah. Right. The one thing that doesn't give you mixed messages is the coronavirus.
So true.
Because it will just straight up kill you.
That's right. Yeah, it's not trying to beat around the bush. If you go to a church and your church gets coronavirus, some of the people that you worship with are going to die.
That's right.
I'm reading it right now. The father died in this church in Texas.
Oh boy.
After they said, "Oh, we're going to hold service." And it's like one thing if you say we're going to hold service and then people get coronavirus from another. It's another when the person telling people it's okay to come to church is the one that has the lethal disease.
Right.
That's
Yeah. Ugh,
crazy.
gosh.
Well, what not believing science and thinking that normal facts are hoaxes will do to you.
I know.
Um,
There's the ongoing feud
This is
between Donald
my
Trump and
favorite
Jeff
news story of the week.
Sessions is continuing.
Yes.
It's been going on for a while, obviously, ever
Right.
since Sessions recused himself, which has now been 3 years ago.
But we
They have
haven't
been
had
sort
an update recently.
Right, but we do now.
Yeah.
Because Trump this week finally formally endorsed Tommy Tuberville, who is a Hall of Fame football coach from Auburn, who is running against Jeff Sessions to be the GOP nominee to run against Doug Jones. It's Sessions' old seat.
Right.
It's his old
Mhm.
Senate seat
Yep.
that he gave up when he became
left.
Attorney General.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and they already had a primary, but neither of them, and it was very close. And so now they're in a runoff. And I think Trump had sort of weighed in on the primary, but like he made like a very formal endorsement, formal by way of Twitter, which is formal for him, of Tommy Tuberville.
But the tweet also, in true Trump style, has some very exciting capitalization in it.
Good. Yes.
I'm going to read it because I don't know how I'm going to indicate to you that there's capital letters, but I think you'll know from my tone. 3 years ago, after Jeff Sessions recused himself, the fraudulent Mueller scam began Alabama. Do not trust.
Capital?
Wait.
Began. Period. Alabama.
Period.
Do not trust.
Alabama. Do not. Sorry. There's no period there. There was a typo in the tweet. Began. Alabama. Do not trust Jeff Sessions. He let our country down. That's why I endorse Coach Tommy Tuberville, a true supporter of our MAGA agenda.
This is like a reporter starting out and not knowing when to emphasize the word that they're using.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Yeah. Fraudulent Mueller scam is inexplicably a proper noun in Donald Trump's vocabulary.
Yeah. Anyway, Jeff Sessions fired back on Twitter, and he tweeted at Donald Trump. He said, "Look, I know your anger, but recusal was required by law. I did my duty, and you're damn fortunate I did.
Oh.
It protected the rule of law and resulted in your exoneration." It didn't result in
It's not exoneration,
by the way. But he said, "Your personal feelings don't dictate who Alabama picks as their senator. The people of Alabama do." And then Trump got asked about it in an interview. And he said, he's not mentally qualified to be attorney general. He was the biggest problem. I mean, look, Jeff Sessions put people in place that were a disaster.
Well, some of this is very true, though.
I know.
I mean,
very true.
I know. Who do you pull for in this fight?
Right? Can't argue with that sentiment.
No.
It's complicated.
So I'm worried that the whole Bama will totally vote for a former football coach.
Oh.
And a former football coach is not, as someone that used to live in that world, that is not what we want.
No, I know. At least he wasn't the coach at Alabama, though.
At Bama.
Right, because Auburn is like their arch enemy.
Right.
I mean, it's in Alabama also, I believe, isn't it? Isn't Auburn, or is it in South Carolina, or where is it?
South Carolina.
It's in South Carolina. Okay.
Let me tell you guys.
Maybe they don't want him.
I don't know what we're talking about.
Senator. I don't know.
Is it football?
Just that we don't want him.
College football coach.
College football.
We just don't want him, is what we're saying.
We don't want him. We don't
want him.
I fear that either of them will probably win, but
we're having this.
But I'm worried that Tommy Tuberville, which is like such a ridiculous name, has a slightly better chance.
I think, especially given that no one on the top of the ticket is going to get all those Democrats out to the polls, has a really good chance, and also would, to be fair, at least be a fun name to say.
Yeah, that's true.
His name sounds as ridiculous as he probably is.
Yeah,
like full cartoon character.
Yeah, he sounds like a cartoon senator, Senator Tuberville. That's a funny name. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And is it more like a B or a P sound? Nobody knows. Either way, it leads to a funny word.
No, exactly. You get to funniness without even having to really try. So that's what counts.
We found out this week that Trump is taking hydroxychloroquine.
That's right. He's cutting back though now.
Is he?
Yeah, he's cutting back because
what do you mean cutting back? Is that just a thing you can take as much of or little of as you want?
Like it's an addiction.
He was taking it, and then he said he was going to stop because I think, first he was trying to say that it was just one bad study that showed that it was bad for you.
Oh, that quote we have to read. It's amazing. He said, if you look at the one survey, the only bad survey, they were giving it to people that were in very bad shape. They were very old, almost dead. It was very a Trump enemy statement. And by Trump enemy statement, he means like the scientific study that was
a scientific study was a Trump enemy statement.
Almost dead.
His pejoratives are like less complicated than literally an embryo. It's amazing.
He's been having some funny comments like this week too, where wasn't it this week where he said he had tested really positively for the coronavirus?
Yeah.
And then he had to explain that that he had tested really positively by testing negative for the coronavirus.
Right.
Yeah. So he's up to shenanigans.
Yeah.
And is taking a drug that can give you cardiac trouble.
Right, which Nancy Pelosi reminded us that he shouldn't be taking because he's morbidly obese.
Oh my God, Twitter really lost its mind about that, because then suddenly the Democrats became people who fat shame, and then that was like its own crisis on the internet. And I was just like, we didn't need to be in this place at all, you guys.
No, you
can't.
can't.
How they were acting in any of this conversation.
There's like an inch wide balance beam the Democrats can walk, and I don't think we've been anywhere near it.
No. We're not on the beam.
Man.
We're not in the gym. We're not
No.
in.
No. Yeah, we're not. Yeah, we're not even at floor exercise.
Exactly.
It'd be one of the easier ones to accomplish.
Meanwhile, we all have Donald Trump's Capital One bank account and routing numbers now. So if you're looking to wire money to him or from him, you now are free to do so.
Kayleigh McEnany just keeps doing everything that I want her to be doing.
Oh my gosh.
What a nightmare person she is.
She's like a literal bobblehead that you put on your
I know.
card.
Yeah.
She's perfect in every way.
So,
anyway, she was talking, she was at the press briefing, and she was talking about how Trump is donating his quarterly salary to HHS. And he does this, he donates a salary, and he's donated it to HHS before, actually. But he always makes sort of like a big show about him donating his salary.
Well, because it's a meaningless gesture.
It's a meaningless gesture that he also shouldn't be doing anyway.
Right.
But regardless, she held up the check that was going to HHS from Donald Trump personally, and it was all just there for all the eyeballs, all the cameras, all the reporters, all the cameras. There it was.
Well, and the Times asked if they use fake checks for these dumb ceremonies that they do, and they said no.
For these Ed McMahon moments.
Right, exactly.
Right, now. Yeah, what? So, oh my God, it should be a giant check.
Right? It's like he doesn't even understand how...
You would think this would be something that he would get.
Right up his alley.
It's like couldn't be more obvious.
Yeah.
A giant, I mean, what... If you're a person who only thinks in TV metaphors and you're donating money, like use your head. This doesn't even make any sense.
Seriously.
Didn't he do that with bills? Like they were like giant, like signatures, giant bills.
His
like,
bill signatures are. I have unfortunately, because I was involved in the passage of a bill last year, I have a red line of that bill that includes his signature, and it is like it's like in Sharpie. Like everyone else, it has signed in pen like an adult. Right. His is like in Sharpie, and the signature looks like he just did this on the page.
Meanwhile, like someone's like dying from some sort of like toxic ingestion of that Sharpie. There's so much coming out from this one signature.
Yeah, and it's like, this is the signature. Like, you just scribble.
Yeah.
It's got very hard
For you audio-only listeners, there was gesturing.
Oh yeah,
it was like wild gesturing, like like at a a car dealership. There's those like blow up like guns that have the crazy arms.
It's very much like that.
That's what Lila was gesturing. That's how she was gesturing with her arm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man.
So that's the news this week.
Yeah. Thanks, Erica, for joining us. Do you have anything to tell the people before we sign off?
Something to tell them to check out, maybe?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me. You both know I'm a huge fan of your podcast, and
thank you.
It's just, reaffirming me that there are some people left in the world that aren't completely fucking insane.
We're
Oh
special,
God, it's us.
different insane.
We're those people.
That's really
Yep.
the
Yeah.
people who rant into microphones into the for a week and a half, an hour and a half every week.
I mean, just spend 5 minutes looking at the news of who's running our country.
That's fair. That's fair.
I
Fair.
mean, look at the bar. Anyways, yeah, I guess I will talk about the pilot that just got into this awesome festival called Series Fest that's taking place in June. I should know those dates. I know it's in the middle of June. We don't actually have our slot yet, so I don't technically know the specific date. But yeah, it's a pilot about a young pharmaceutical researcher who is working in opioid research, trying to develop an addiction-proof opioid. And she realizes that her dad, who's dying of cancer, is using psychedelic therapy to help his end of life. And this kind of totally throws her for a loop. And tying in a political theme, her mom is a Republican senator running for re-election and is in bed with the FDA. So there's a bunch of tension-filled plot lines here. And eventually, with her hippie best friend who drives out from LA after she gets fired from her pharmaceutical company and she's super bummed, comes out to comfort her and hang out. And she discovers that her dad has these psilocybin mushrooms. They all do mushrooms together, and the light bulb goes off because she's overly ambitious. And her dad was this big, renowned botanist who inspired her to go into research. And so they opened this underground psychedelic therapy clinic in their garage under the nose of her
her mother who's
under the nose of her mom. Exactly.
Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah. I just looked it up. Series Fest is June 18th to 24th.
Oh, thank you for that.
Is when you should look for this.
What's the name of it?
It's called Shepherds. It's kind of a play on the idea. I did a lot of research into psychedelic therapy. I was really interested in it, and I was
Did you watch a Goop Lab?
It's on my list. It's on my list. I've heard
Brent's a super fan, so if you need to know anything about it.
I've heard a lot about Goop Lab.
Okay, sorry.
I mean, that's what's most important. We should just talk about Goop Lab.
For sure.
But yeah, I was really horrified to find no one's shocked, but when you get into the details of it, the assault on science and the assault on research from a federal level, when there could be this really alternative source of healing and medicine counter to the pharmaceuticals that just come pouring out of these huge companies. And I kind of just dug into that research, and I thought, wow, no one's really talking about this. And vis-a-vis the opioid crisis, like that's
right.
Totally.
It's really illuminating. So that was kind of the genesis of that. And actually recently, the founder of MAPS, Rick Goblin, he was just in Forbes because MAPS just got a big, they got some big news in terms of funding for FDA approved trials going into phase 3. This is like the biggest news that they've gotten. And this is in regard to MDMA for PTSD, because phase 3 trials is usually when drug trials really crash and burn.
Oh, wow.
And they're showing really promising results. And what's really cool about MAPS, which is like the biggest research engine in psychedelic research and science, is that they don't have any investors. So all their money has been raised. So they're not owned by anyone. So that's really, really, really cool. And that just happened. So it's kind of exciting, and it would be MDMA is obviously not the same as psilocybin, but it's all sort of under the umbrella of psychedelic research. And it would be really exciting, considering what we're all going through, again, looking down the pipe of what people are going to need, to have other options for pain relief than opioids.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
That sounds great.
Yeah. So that's June 18th to 24th.
Yay. Oh, and our
Seriously.
handles, if we can give those out. Our
Yeah.
Twitter
Do it.
handle is Shepherds Series, and it's like sheep. Everyone, I think, thinks that it's PARDS, but it's actually SHEPHERDS. So think of herding sheep. So at Shepherds Series for Twitter, at Shepherds the Series on Instagram, and Facebook is the same, at Shepherds the Series. So check it out.
Great. Go follow them. Do you want to give your handles? Do you?
Yes, sure. Why not? That's what everyone wants to hear. Is just like a bunch of
handles,
a bunch of promo asks. eBanksy is my Instagram, EBANKSY, and then you can follow 5150 prods. So 5150 PRODS on Twitter.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yes.
Thank you guys.
And we will be back next
And
week
gals.
with a new array of exciting political observations, rants. Hard to know.
I'll be tuning in.
Okay. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you guys. Thank you both so much.
Bye.